on behalf of the Southern California chapter of the American Printing History Association. Welcome to today's talk by Jessica Holada, where Bohemians gathered for culture on the Arroyo Seco from 1895 to 1947. I am the program chair for APA, and about a month or so ago, back in December, so 2 months ago, we had an event here where we had the exhibition opening, and then there was a day spent touring sites that you're going to hear about in Jessica's talk. And I know that some of you were there, and many of you weren't because it was a sold-out thing, but it was really interesting, so you'll get to hear a little bit about why it was such a popular thing. Jessica, I've known her for many years. I don't know how many, but I first met her at a salon where she was working on a book with another friend of ours, and her creativity has never ceased to amaze me. She has a bachelor's in art history from Loyola Marymount and a master's in library and information studies from UCLA, and so we're going to hear her talk now. Welcome. Oh wait, I forgot. And just so if you don't know her, I think probably everybody knows her, but if you don't know her, she's currently at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences as the poster librarian. So welcome, Jessica. Thanks.
My first introduction to the Arroyo was by way of the historic Pasadena Freeway, the first of its kind in the West. Many of you probably took this byway here today. It was actually a destination for my automobile-loving father, who brought the family along to test drive new tires on the parkway's curves. This inland country was an exotic place for a girl who was accustomed to the small treeless lots of her native Hermosa Beach. My orientation was solidly west, facing the horizon of the Pacific Ocean, rather than north and eastward towards the vertical San Gabriel Range. The bowed sycamores, the architecture in every idiom, the Southwest Museum on its hillside perch, the handsome bridges. The Arroyo Seco was a place that was geographically distinct, pleasantly overgrown, and curiously sophisticated. The perennial creek in the concrete channel hugging the roadway also hinted at a seasonal source of wildness that lay beyond the ridges and oaks. Since then, my relationship with the landscape has evolved from a child's eye view to one of active personal use and historic understanding. But knowing what the region once was, I may never shake my romantic yearning to witness a pre-development, even pre-human history landscape, before the first acorn was ground by the Tongva, before Gaspar de Bartola and his expedition crossed through the region in 1770 and named it Arroyo Seco, before the first sheep grazed the Rancho San Rafael, before Charles Fletcher Lummis hauled the first of many boulders from the streambed to build his rustic home, El Alisal. A cluster of plein-air painters lived in the Arroyo and captured their unspoiled suburban Eden. They give us a colorful window into the past, including this view by William Lees Judson of untouched hillside chaparral and riparian flora. By the time this work was executed, Los Angeles and Pasadena had already grown from humble pueblo and fruit-growing communities to centers of commerce linked by the Pacific Electric Railway. By the early 1900s, resort hotels like the Raymond had been hosting snowbirds from the East Coast and the Midwest for well over a decade. From this elegant base, tourists could enjoy the favorable climate and a host of local attractions, including the avian novelties of Austin's ostrich farm. Dig those legs. The terrace grounds of Busch Gardens, and an array of outdoor adventures on Mount Low via the famous incline and tramway. While the bourgeoisie were busy building summer estates and retirement homes on the flats of Pasadena above the Arroyo, An increasing number of artists and writers were migrating to the area to build their own affordable homesteads near the watershed's edge. Photographers, authors, architects, craftsmen, and later printers and serious fathers recognized the region's appeal, forming a loose colony of enterprising eccentrics who comprised what Robert Guenther, historian, termed Arroyo culture. But who were these so-called Bohemians? The imagination easily jumps to stereotypes from another era. Had to go back. These new inhabitants of the Arroyo Seco, who we'll meet in just a moment, arrived in Highland Park, Garbanza, South Pasadena, and Pasadena by active choice rather than happenstance. With some exceptions, they also arrived in middle age, enticed by fresh opportunity and the booster literature of the day that promised improved health, abundant sunshine, and access to vast and beautiful scenery. Many Arroyans were socially progressive and brought with them a relatively enlightened view of Native American, Hispanic, and Asian immigrant culture in the West. They helped to preserve and document this heritage, as well as to defend their rights in deeds and in print. Some took extended trips into the field, far from the composed exhibition halls of popular World's Fairs, bringing firsthand knowledge of some strange corners of our country to the lay public, to use this period-appropriate title from 1892 by Charles Fletcher Lummis. With a mixture of showmanship and sensitive regionalism, much of the creative output in the Arroyo was shot through with the stylistic and social ideals of the arts and crafts movement, championed in the United States by Elbert Hubbard and his Roy Crofter's print shop, Gustav Stickley, whose furniture fame launched the influential Craftsman magazine. As post-Victorians seized by the values of simplicity, integrity, and happy labor espoused by William Morris and the Kelmscott Press, they shared more with utilitarian crafts traditions than their modernist intellectual counterparts in artist colonies like Carmel, California, and Taos. While spheres of influence and collaboration flourished in the Arroyo, they were not sustained and did not always overlap. On the one hand, print culture in the region could be characterized as fractured, overreaching, underdeveloped, and hampered by self-interest. But on the other, it could be seen as brave, entertaining, and the result of boundless curiosity and engagement that helped move Los Angeles area print culture forward. Jake Zeitlin would call the achievements of his feisty book trade colleague, Alice Millard of Pasadena, a remarkable little renaissance. But this could describe the whole of the Arroyo scene, which experienced many little renaissances. And like this poussoir-colored map by the late Pasadena artist-printer Vance Gary, the history that follows is not to scale. I'll just let you know that now. Today, I'm giving you a sweeping contextual view, a sweeping tour of key locations and people that make up our timeline. But now let's visit and meet our motley individuals. Starting first with Charles Fletcher Lummis, who personally conducted the construction of his unusual stone and adobe home. Here he is, hauling boulders up to make a wall, I'm sure. And one great feature of this home that we saw on our tour was that the concrete floors are sort of terraced from one room to the other, and it facilitated hosing them down after one of his noises or parties. I thought that had a lot of forethought there. And here's an interior view of his museum with his curios from the Southwest that would later become part of the Southwest Museum's collection. In addition to his signature green wide-wale corduroy suits, Lummis was notable for a long list of activities, acting in various times in the role of printer, long-distance walker, successful writer and editor, outspoken critic, flamboyant womanizer, party host, promoter of literature of the West, crusader of California Hispanic and Southwest Native American heritage, and ambitious institution builder. The Landmarks Club, the Sequoia League, the Southwest Museum of the American Indian among them. And we should not forget his 5-year stint as Los Angeles City Librarian, where he apparently performed as a creative manager, launching the Biblio Smiles,
What?
which should be considered for revival. We are human.
Never go
In 1879, Lummis made his first and only printed effort, seen in lower left, birch bark poems, literally printed on bark. Through trial and error, he learned to successfully prepare the sheets and used a small press given to him by his grandfather. This novel little book went through many editions, selling over 14,000 copies, getting him through school at Harvard. He would go on to publish a number of other books on his favorite subjects. One of the most significant jobs he took on was assuming the editorship of the promotional magazine Land of Sunshine, which would later be renamed Out West. He transformed it into an important vehicle to showcase regional writers, artists, photographers, and historians, including his own contributions in his standing opinion column in the Lion's Den. With the new format at right, a new cover designed by Guenther Borglum really signaled that he was promoting a literary magazine. Guenther Borglum of Mount Rushmore fame designed the mountain lion there. Another one of the earliest arrivals to the Pasadena area, South Pasadena, was Margaret Collier Graham. She had a lovely Queen Anne Victorian on the Monterey Hills above Pasadena. In addition to land development, she wrote short stories of local color for national magazines, which were later gathered into 2 volumes, Stories of the Foothills, which is on display in the gallery, and The Wizard's Daughter at Wright. Like Lummis, she was deeply involved in civic activities and wrote passionately about women's suffrage. She also contributed a thoughtful monthly piece entitled Angle of Reflection in the Land of Sunshine from 1898 to 1899. The magazine was an outlet for other rising stars of the California regionalism, including Mary Austin. She lived for a time in the Arroyo, receiving mentorship and advice from Lummis, who identified and nurtured her nascent talent. 3 years later, she would write The Land of Little Rain, which is now a classic in the genre. And just a few blocks south, in El Alisal, the formidable Ida Meacham Strobridge installed herself and her parents in a sprawling ranch house she called At the Sign of the Sagebrush. After experiencing personal trauma, losing her children to childbirth or pneumonia, all of them, and later her husband to pneumonia, she quit a successful career ranching and mining in Nevada and took up writing and bookbinding full-time. She wrote 3 books on the desert, Miners in Mirage Land, The Loom of the Desert, and Land of Purple Shadows, which were illustrated by local artist Maynard Dixon. She also managed to publish a handful of books in 1906, we think. I actually can't confirm this. I think it's her, because she was involved in a lot of the binding. If anybody knows anything about the Arroyo Press, let me know. But she did a bunch of publications just in that year that were really beautiful, including Hieroglyphics of Love, which is on display. Here she is in her bindery, her attic bindery, with furniture built by her father, all custom made. She also ran a little gallery of local art inside her house, which showcased local painters like Carl Oscar Borg. And I wanted to show you an example of a full leather binding that she did. It's so big I didn't have room for it in a case, but it is really lovely. And this is an example of what she bound in there. She would sign a date and number every single book she bound. And here's the interior. It's a bit cropped there, but you can kind of get a sense of it. And next we have George Wharton James. He may be my personal favorite among them. He was an Englishman. He was a vegetarian. He was a defrocked Methodist minister. His former wife accused him of adultery. Apparently he was very charming. And he was afraid of razor blades, and that is why his beard remained through his lifetime. He sounded like he was not only maybe touched with a little bit of mania because he was so productive, but he was also just very careful. And coming to the West helped him. He regained his health. He was kind of a sickly boy, and when he joined family in Nevada, he just found this new rigor and wrote about it a lot in his books. Here's some examples of his travel literature, which goes deep. Not only descriptive travel books, but books actually made for hotel associations. They're very lavish productions. So you would get one of these books for, you know, one trip that you would be taking around the state of California. And he has lots of self-promotion inside the book, where he tells you where to get things printed, which is where the place, you know, the book was printed here. And really like lovely production design. And here's George Wharton James in his living room, showing boys some baskets. He was a big collector of baskets, and he wrote some notable books on baskets, both the symbolism in baskets and how they're made and constructed. And I think they're still referenced today, although they are a bit dated. I just love this display he has here with the keys to describe them. These are California-made baskets. And he would do this where he would set up these tableaus of pottery and baskets around his house and photograph them, and they would become plates in his books. And here's just a smattering. He was just kind of all over the place, George Wharton James. In the one on the left, this story of Captain the Horse with the Human Brain. He touched on this topic a lot with birds and just the world. He believed the world was radiant, and that there was an intelligence in rocks and horses and birds. And he's almost, I don't know. He does seem like a bit touched with the kind of enthusiasm that his language was very florid. So the book in center shows you a book from his self-published Radiant Life Press, and he did a lot of inspirational, kind of new agey books through that press. But then he also had things done by like Little Brown, including this Arizona, the Wonderland, which was part of the See America First series. A term that Lummis actually coined. There's a lot of crossover between George Wharton James and Lummis. And here he is with Scraggles. This is my personal favorite story with George Wharton James. He found this little bird. It fell out of a nest, and he wrote, of course, a book about it. And his friend wrote a poem about it, and then they printed it, letterpress. It was a whole phenomenon. And I think it got him through his writing, this little bird. And associated with George Wharton James is William Lees Judson, who was just down the road a piece near Clyde Brown, who we'll be be talking about soon. He was the dean of USC's College of the Arts, and it was located in this building. And he was a painter himself, and I think because he was also a religious man, he really was connected to George Wharton James, and they went out into the field and did photography in the Arizona desert. And when he retired in 1920, the studio was converted into what is now the Judson Studios. It's still there. It's a stained glass atelier, still family run. But before they did that, they had a little venture. Here's another view of the college. There used to be a throughway train track there that's no longer there. But George Wharton James and William Lee Judson were ambitious fellows, and they put together this Arroyo Craftsmen magazine as sort of a cart before the horse publication, bringing together artisans in the area to form a guild of craft workers. And they put forth just their ideas that were very much like the kinds of ideas that the Craftsman magazine and the Roy Crofters were espousing about quality products, non-factory made products. And in the style of George Wharton James, he promises lots and lots of publications to come, and ways that you can get things printed and pounded with metal and made with wood. And it's just a lovely little book about sort of the promise of something that didn't really quite come to fruition. The guild itself dissolved around 1913, around the time World War I happened, but this is the one and only publication that they were able to put out. And this is their motto: "We can." They wanted to. And another neighbor is Olive Percival. She came to the area quite early, not far behind Lummis, and found a nice little piece of property to build her half-timber little English cottage that she shared with her mother. She was a self-styled spinster, and actually had guest books that said Mistress Olive Percival, spinster, which you would sign and illustrate if you wished. There's another view of the house. She was a bookplate designer, and she wrote about bookplates and curated the first exhibition in Los Angeles about bookplates. And she also wrote for national magazines like I'm forgetting her name, Margaret Collier Graham, and was managed to do a couple of books, including this one about her travels to Mexico in 1899. Lummis kind of panned this, which wasn't so nice. He thought it was too cursory. But most of all, we might note Olive Percival, gardener extraordinaire, that she was a book collector. And she amassed 10,000 books during her lifetime, the core of which was children's literature, and it's now at UCLA. But you can see that this is her bedroom. This is actually the bedpost of her bed. She's got books 2 deep, and I'm sure they were on every single wall in the house when she passed. A friend of Olive's was Alice Millard, who's from Chicago. She married George Millard, who was a very sophisticated man who was the rare books dealer at McClurg's in Chicago. They had 28 years separating them, but they fell in love. They both loved the Pre-Raphaelites, and they loved the arts and crafts of William Morris, and they would travel together to England and buy books. And when George retired in in 1917, they moved to Pasadena, different location, and they were only there for 4 years, where they started his business here. I love that. Libraries formed or enriched. And they really did focus on bringing important books to this area. It was they kind of revolutionized book selling at that level. But after George passed in 1819, Alice Millard just charged ahead with the book selling and developed relationships with new collectors like Williams Andrew Clark and Estelle Doheny. And she had Frank Lloyd Wright build this lovely house, which she called La Miniatura, which has its own custom textile block construction. It was the first first one of its kind in residential architecture. To sort of showcase her book. She wanted a place to educate people about books and sell books, have a really classy place for people to come. And she managed to forget a bedroom when she had him design this. So it just shows you where her focus was. Here's the inside. It's kind of wonderful that it's this modern architecture, but she just had things draped with textiles and European antiques, so it looks very cluttered in my view, but books do make it cozy, I'm sure. I'm sure it's cool. And here she is showing off some important book. And one thing that people remember about Alice Millard is that she was an elegant woman. She was pushy, she was persistent, but she was elegantly dressed, always, always, always in blue to match her eyes. And as her hair turned gray, she tinted it blue as well, which is just fabulous to think about. And later, when she was sort of outgrowing the space, she had Frank Lloyd Wright's son build a smaller extension just to house a gallery. And she had this sort of permanent display. You can see these aren't really modern or contemporary display techniques here, but she's got some didactics along the wall and the vitrines. And when she passed away, a group of people got together and ensured that this teaching collection was not broken up when her belongings went to auction, and it's at the Huntington now. But she would bring in school children and have lovely little exhibits, some of them loan exhibits, and she had 5 ones in particular where she had catalogs made, including this one of Cobb & Sanderson work, and we'll meet him in a little bit, but Ward Ritchie printed these. If you go in the gallery, you'll see the original Bible by Cobb & Sanderson, and you can see Ritchie's referencing that in this first page with the large capital letters. And he did these little cuts himself in basswood. Clyde Brown. He came to us from the newspaper business. He was a typographer, first in Northern California, then he settled, worked for the Examiner in LA, and like Olive and like Charles, he found a cheap piece of property and went to work building his little Franciscan fantasy, as Kevin Starrs called it. We can see his son here in the oval. It's a little hard to get a sense of this, but just imagine this hole that he's sort of reclining in. They're working on the construction here. And this beautiful stained glass window was put in its place, showing a completely fictitious scene, totally historically inaccurate, of a Native American pulling a hand press as the Padre looks on. He designed it and the Judson Studios executed it. This was in the press room. That was part of his Abbey San Encino. It was originally conceived as a pueblo, which is kind of incredible. I don't know how much further he could have dug into the hillside to make this happen, but here, ooh, I have a point. Here you see, this building is standing. This is the chapel, the quadrangle, or the cloisters, and the press room is here. Those windows there. But he, conceived this whole mess of buildings back there. There were studios that went up the hillside, and I'll briefly talk about some people that lived in them. They're no longer there. They've sort of fallen apart. But he did have renters. And like the Roy Crofters, he really wanted to see this sort of center of busy printing work and other activities happening here at his abbey. Here's another view of the chapel and his printer's mark, and one of many iterations just talking about the construction of the abbey. He was obsessed, you might say, with talking about his efforts with this building, which took him a long time to build. But they're beautiful little books, and they're enchanting the way they're written. They're just he's not like a Barker, but he's something close to that, a Midway Barker. But he uses antiquated language. And here they're announcing that they're almost done with the abbey. So there's lots of these little things that were printed along the way. We're pretty sure that House Olson, who we'll talk about in a moment, designed this. His design work starts to sort of move away from a real mission-looking design to something a little cleaner. And here, this is probably the big book, his summary sort of work on the abbey, and it's got a nice, even in 1929? Mm-hmm.
1929.
Yeah. He was still referencing the old borders that you would see on the, kind of referencing the Kelmscott press. He was criticized for being kind of an unremarkable printer by some people and thought to be not collectible, but I think that the way, the text especially, makes it very charming. Here's another little promotional piece he did on the abbey. His wife conducted weddings and did invitations. She would do. They had weddings in the chapel. They had frat parties and initiations in the dungeon. Lots of activity going on with the press. Here's just a couple more examples of title pages, this sort of aesthetic. He also managed to put out these little magazines that sometimes would only be one volume, and then he'd be done. And then he'd move on to another title. Maybe a couple volumes, and then he'd be done. But he was always ranting about something. And here's some examples of his private press work. These were people that lived at the abbey. So he kind of had these people that were renters, but they needed printing by him. So it was this great ecosystem where and he had this great association with Occidental College. It started in 1910. He went into partnership with a man who had a lino press, and this revolutionized what he could do. And the first thing he said was, let's do a newspaper, and let's make it happen more than it was happening before. We'll do it all, once a week. And so here's the Occidental. And some colorful humor magazines, the Tawny Cat, and the literary magazine. He's still hanging on to these borders, but sometimes he would go away. I love this. He actually designed this cover, the tiger lily. That they are the tigers here at Oxy. And some advertisements. So here's the Abbey, and here are these studios. I'm not sure. I've never seen any photographs of these buildings, so I have no idea whether these are fantasy depictions or if they really did look kind of almost like Dutch or something. Here's House Olson. House was the name given to him by Clyde, because he was big. And he was handsome, he was a drunk, but a wonderful designer. And he worked for Clyde Brown for over 10 years until he went out on his own with Roscoe Thomas and started the Castle Press. And this is their announcement, used on Abbey equipment. And here's just a little taste of some of the other work that was done at the Abbey by some of his renters, including Lord Ritchie. And here's sort of a bibliographically minorly famous book where he did this book and he just messed up. He had so many mistakes, and his friend who was renting with him, Lawrence Clark Powell, who would later be librarian at UCLA, found his mistakes and made him feel pretty terrible. And so he did a new edition. Or sorry, this is the original, and this is the remake of Robertson Jeffers' poem Stars, which he did ask permission to print, and I think Jeffers did like it. There's an inscription in one of these where he sends it to another person. But in 1930, Ward Ritchie did a handful of things at the Abbey Press, and Clyde Brown helped him bind the black number on the side. And here's the title page from Nut Brown Beer, another effort at the Abbey. And Scott Haselton was also a renter. So you get the sense that there were all these different people. I mean, I think there was like an insurance salesman. There were people that were not artistic in any way that were Abbey renters. And here was the start of the Journal of the Cactus and Succulent Society of America, which is still being published today. It's an important plant journal. And here's the society living it up in the dungeon. That's Scott Haselton there. It must have been a great place to live during this time. I can only imagine. It was just a bustling, very exciting place, the Abbey. And here's the cover of the book that's on display out there at Succulents. He actually used the Abbey San Encino Press name, which is a bit confusing for a while, and actually the post office was very confused about where to send the mail, because Clyde Brown had Abbey San Encino Press, and so did Scott Haselton when he did leave the Abbey and used the Castle Press equipment. So he did go by the Garden Press later. Here's just a couple of examples of the inside of this book. These are all tipped in color illustrations. It just took him a huge amount of time to do. And another view of the Arroyo. That's it. Thank you.
Is there a stylistic similarity or something outstanding about their craftsmanly work that might set it apart from something done back east during the same time?
Well,
were there elements?
Yeah, I think that's sort of the point I was trying to make is that it was so referential. I think that
You mean referential to California?
to level the arts and crafts press work, I think. I mean, I do think.
Oh, so not that original is what you're saying?
I don't think. I don't think that there are huge departures here.
Okay.
But I mean, just in content, I think that that's the thing that really sets it apart.
Did other groups in other parts of the country build houses and write about their houses like we do?
Yeah, I know. This is the thing though. Like the houses seem to be such a special thing about this history, right? I mean, they weren't just printing and writing. They were like hand carrying boulders and making walls. It's kind of crazy. Well, I know that Jeffers built his tour house in Northern California, so there's another stone dwelling that we have as an example. But yeah, this whole little vernacular architecture thing that was happening here seemed pretty special. I don't know if there are any other places where people were. I mean, one that comes to mind is like Mercer in Doylestown. You know what I'm talking about? Font Hill. He built his own sort of poured concrete thing, and he had this kind of energy and vision in the way that some of the people in the Arroyo did, where he wanted to build a museum. He wanted to. That's one that comes to mind, but it wasn't. And he had tile works too, his Moravian tile works. So
we did a little reference work on that in the Jeffers piece, and we looked into the housing. Of course, everybody, it was the real estate boom that made Southern California, and their building of their homes was the reaction to the real estate boom. We're going to, original materials and stuff. By the way, the Abbey, it still exists. I got a photograph of it. You can go see if those are still there. I can't remember if those back buildings are there or not, but if you give me an email, I'll email you the photo.
Yeah, they're not there anymore. They've been torn down. I think that it was pretty not permanent construction the way.
Yeah, well,
I think he poured all his effort into that first building, and then he was.
Well, they have that same problem at Ali Sal now because there's no metal in the construction. They were trying to be primitive, and the termites like that.
A lot. Yeah.
Well, it seems like a preoccupation with the arts and crafts movement. We're going to actually do it ourselves.
Yes.
Where in Pasadena, people were mail ordering pre-constructed houses and putting them up in lots all over the place.
Right. That's true.
Wasn't there a similarity to what was happening in Europe and England?
Well, William Morris.
At the same time.
Yeah, William Morris is, the touchstone there. I mean, everything from your wall coverings to your most humble chair was made by somebody not in a factory, using quality materials and goods construction.
Did they ever get flooded?
Oh gosh, I have a great story. Okay, so Olive Percival she was kind of in the lowlands of Garvanza, and there was a flood, and she's just like, okay, what do I do? It's like there's a fire, what do I grab? And I guess she had two buckets. One contained kittens, and the other contained Kate Greenaway books. And these are children's illustrated books. So those were her two prized things that she was going to haul away from the oncoming water. And stuff like that.
I thought she had to choose.
She had, the kittens and the books. But yeah, I think it did. It would flood occasionally. I think that was one of the reasons why the land is not as desirable. I mean, there are people that are on record as saying, it was kind of stinky and fumey, and when it wasn't running, it was the vapors, from.
Wasn't Alice Millard's house built right under a creek?
Yes. Yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright had no clue about the landscape here. Yeah, it was a ravine. He plopped La Miniatura right down in a ravine, and there was one big flood, rains that happened, and the house acted like a dam. And they had to, plumb. I think he put, some really small diameter thing to sort of drain it. You know, and yeah, I mean, that house is problematic in a lot of other ways, which a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright houses are, the flat roofs, you know.
Well, especially on concrete,
Yeah.
that it was not well done at all.
Right.
None of his houses that were done with those artistic blocks survived.
Well, there's the Innis Brown house.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still
Yeah.
issues with it.
All of the houses, from what I can see, are still standing except for Strobridge's house, that ranch house that was just south of Lomas's. It's no longer there. It's a big apartment complex. Nina and I drove around and we were looking. Part of our tour package stuff in December was a self-guided tour, so you could go and visit these other locations.
So the Victorian's still there?
Yeah, yeah. Graham's house is still there. Although the address is a little bit different, George Horton James's house seems to still be there. He had, even though I think that his output was kind of like Clyde Brown, it was just sort of lots and lots and lots, and so diverse. But he was the most Victorian of all of them. You know, he had a very sort of dull home. You know, you could see his furnishings and his dress. He was just a little. He wasn't as eccentric in that regard. In other regards, yes.